So I started off originally in government and politics. So I was Mike Bloomberg's campaign manager when he ran for mayor. I worked for him at City Hall. I was the deputy governor of the state of Illinois for 4 years, so ran the state's budget operations, legislation, policy, communications, but most impressively did not get indicted. I worked for a guy who did go to jail for 14 years named Rob Blagojevich. A couple of years on the Hill as Chuck Schumer's communications director in the Senate. Started my first company in 2010, a consulting firm that runs big campaigns. So imagine you're Walmart, you're trying to open up stores in 4 major downtowns, and you've got zoning issues and union issues and community issues. We figure all that stuff out. I was sitting in a meeting in early 2011, and a friend of mine called and said, hey, there's a guy with a small transportation startup. He's having some regulatory problems. Would you mind talking to him? I become Uber's first political advisor that day. I get really lucky when Travis calls back and says, I can't afford your fee. Would you take equity? I had no idea what equity meant, but thank God I said yes. That was back during the Series A. And then spent the next few years running campaigns all over the US to legalize Uber and ride sharing. That worked. Repeated the process with Clear to get them into airports, taking equity again. And then met my partner, Jordan Knopf, who at the time was running Blackstone's internal venture fund. And the question we started asking each other is, if you truly understand regulatory risk and if you can do something about it, how much of a better investor does that make? 10%, 20%, 30%. And we didn't know the answer. We just thought it was something. And based on that, we raised our first fund in 2016. Early stage fund, seed and Series A deals. We look at all the same stuff as every early stage VC. The founder, the TAM, the underlying idea, the underlying tech. But then we ask sort of 2 additional questions. One, is there a gating regulatory issue or opportunity that if it were solved could really drive growth and valuation? And if so, can we solve it? And when the answer is yes to both, that's when we invest. So the first deal we ever did was FanDuel. They got hit with cease and desist orders by about 40 different state attorney generals. We ran campaigns all over the country to legalize fantasy sports betting. Second investment was a company called Lemonade. It's an insurance startup based out of Israel. They need to get insurance licenses in every state over the objections of the incumbents in the insurance industry. We made that happen through a variety of ways. Some of them were required things like passing legislation, which did in Florida. Some just required in Texas. They were like, what time do you want your license? Because, they're pro-business there. In New York, I had to call Andrew Cuomo and threaten him. But either way, it worked. It's very fun when you can actually be on the other side of threatening Andrew Cuomo, by the way. Doesn't happen that often. Raised our second fund in 2019. Our third in 2021. We're heavily in digital tech and fintech. Some of the companies we've invested in, I said, FanDuel, Lemonade, Roman, Coinbase, Bird, Alma, Wheel, Sunday. So performance, I think we're in a quiet period, so I guess I won't say performance directly, and you can ask me later if you want. But it's very high because I have a monopoly in my little niche of venture capital. About to raise our fourth fund. We're capping at 200 million. Separate from that, I do a few other things. I own a very bad business on the Lower East Side. It's a bookstore and podcast studio. So lose lots of money doing that, but it's fun, and I knew that was going to happen. Thanks to Uber, I've got my own family foundation. So we do 2 things. One is we're funding and running the campaign to make mobile voting possible in the US. My basic premise is, this is what I learned after 15 years in government and politics, every policy output is the result of a political input. Every politician makes every decision solely based on re-election and nothing else. Mike happened to be an exception to it, but in some ways he was the exception that proved the rule. And so if you're a politician, because of gerrymandering, the only election that ever really matters is your primary. And primary turnout in this country is 10 to 15%. And who's that 10 to 15%? The furthest left, the furthest right, or a handful of special interests. And so the reason nothing gets done is nothing's supposed to get done. Because if all you're supposed to do is make that small group of people happy, and they're the purists, they don't want compromise, they don't want consensus, they want to feel righteous and good about themselves. But when I ran all those campaigns to legalize Uber, the way that we beat taxi, and I know now Uber is this giant company and taxi sort of this decimated industry, but at the time we were a tiny little Series A startup and taxi was a muscular industry. We got about 3 million of our customers to advocate for us politically over the app. We were able to tell people, if you like this service and you want it to continue, press this button and you'll reach your city council member, state senator, mayor, whoever the relevant person was that we needed. Millions of people did it. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, if these people, these people don't know who their state senator is, they don't vote in city council primaries, but clearly they're not so apathetic that they won't do anything. They're just not going to miss taking their kid to school on a Tuesday so that they could vote, in a local election. And so what if they could vote on their phone? And as blockchain and cloud technology got better, we started sponsoring elections in different states. So we did 7 elections, 21 jurisdictions where I paid for the states to administer the elections, and people either with disabilities or deployed military voted on their phones. Those worked. Turnout doubled, but I was getting a lot of shit from the cybersecurity community. So I decided I'll build my own mobile voting tech. So I put $10 million of my own money into a tech build. We will release the tech in Q1. It will be free and open source to anybody who wants to use it. And then we got to build a movement of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, because if you want to unite the parties, try to take away their power. That will be the one time, ironically, that they will work together to try to stop this. The other thing we do is universal school meals. So we fund and run campaigns out of our foundation to mandate programs like universal school meals, breakfast after the bell, expanded SNAP for seniors. The insight we had was that the hunger groups are lovely people who are terrible at politics. It's almost, if you are lovely, you're probably going to be bad at politics. And our question was, if I had my team run these campaigns and if I paid for the lobbying, the polling, the ads, the PR, all that stuff, could we win? Answer is yes. So we've passed bills in 20 states, 22 bills, 13 million more people now have access to food on an almost daily basis as a result. And from an ROI standpoint, about $6 million of my money has unlocked about $1.5 billion a year in new government spending on hunger programs. Separate from that, I teach at Columbia Business School. I host a podcast called Fire Law by the Intersection of Tech and Politics. As Marty mentioned, I wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Fixer. It's a memoir about Uber and all the different regulatory campaigns. I have a novel coming out in about 6 weeks. It's called Obvious in Hindsight. It is about a campaign to legalize flying cars in New York, LA, and Austin. On one side is the startup and their vicious political consultants, meaning me. And the other side is Uber, the Audubon Society, the socialists, the trans unions, and the Russian mob. And the book is absurd, but ultimately what it tries to do is give, in an entertaining way, a sense of here's why decisions are really made in politics, here's why decisions are really made in tech. And I do a couple of things I'm probably forgetting about right now, but overall, love talk about the venture market, tech, regulation, politics, whatever you want. Yes, sir.
Sure, good. You seem to be focused on a sweet spot of regulatory risk management. That's a favorite word.
Yeah, sure.
Looking at it from the rule of law concept,
Yeah.
how do you differentiate between domestic and international? Actually, you just don't want to go.
It's a great question. So we do go there sometimes, but fundamentally there's sort of 2 distinctions. One is if there is no rule of law, we can't operate, right? So China, Russia, I need to effectively, all right, I need to be able to make a politician nervous that if they don't do what I want, they're not going to win their next election. If there are no free and fair elections to begin with, then that doesn't matter and my entire power goes away. And then if we are running elections in other countries that are in Western democracies, one way or another, there's still a lot of translation that has to happen, but those can be done.
So would you say more Western European type countries would be places that you would go?
Yeah, Western Europe, Australia, Israel, certain parts of Asia, but yeah, but not as much Latin America, not as much Africa, and certainly not China or Russia. Yes, ma'am.
You are so right about the voting power is in the primaries where no one votes.
Right.
So, I mean, is this something that you personally want to change nationally?
Yeah, I mean, so look, my guess is that to the extent that we succeed, it'll be sequenced, right? Blue states will probably adopt it ahead of red states because now there's all this craziness on the right about sort of election security. Probably state and local elections before federal, probably primaries before generals. But the reality is 80% of the governing of this country happens in city and state government, and all that politics is decided in the primary. So if you told me state and local primaries for the first 10 years, great, that would solve a lot of the problem. So yeah, we're gonna have, the really hard part, building the tech wasn't easy, but the really hard part is going to be passing bills in all 50 states that allow mobile voting to take place. And it's what it's going to take is mobilizing, that whole Gen Z movement. So like the Parkland kids who, remember, they're working with us now. So we're really trying to figure out how do we spark almost a version of the Arab Spring here in the US. And we've got some other good allies too. So Martin Luther King III is a big supporter of ours because from a voter suppression standpoint, if someone's just going like this on their phone, you don't know the color of their finger, right? So it's the best anti-voter suppression tool. The National Federation for the Blind are big partners of ours because if you're blind, voting is especially difficult. Technology's made that a lot easier. So there's a bunch of different groups, but I think ultimately we win or lose this thing with Gen Z.
But like in Europe, you have to actually register in person. So will you have to register in person?
No, I mean, our system also allows for registration,
on the phone.
and it also allows for information. So if there's, nonpartisan campaign literature like the League of Women Voters or local jurisdiction issues, it could link to that. The idea is to be able to do absolutely everything from your phone, because the reality is this: we all understand logically that political inputs drive policy outputs. The fact that I said that wasn't the first time that ever occurred to you guys. We also all have lives, right? And like when you got a meeting at 10 a.m. or 8 a.m. or 6 p.m. on a Tuesday that happens to be election day, and you can't miss the meeting, you skip the election. You might not do that for the presidential election, but pretty much all of us do that for everything else. And so we're not going to change the human nature of voters, and we're not going to change the human nature of politicians. We're never going to make them better human beings, right? My guess is...
You can vote in better people.
Yes, right. And my guess is in the Greek Senate, the Roman Senate, same exact personality, but we can make it so much easier to vote that we go from 12% turnout to 36. So take guns as an example, and I'm actually independent at this point, so I hate both parties, but I'll use this one. Say you're a Republican congressman from Florida, turnout in your primary is 12%, NRA members are half that 12%. You know intellectually that it's nuts that someone can walk into a store and walk out with an AK-47. You also know that if you were to support changing that, you would lose your next primary immediately, which means you're not going to do it, because if your choice is keep my job or make kids in school safer, they all pick their job every single time, right? But instead of trying to change that person's nature, now turnout, let's say because of mobile voting, is 36% in that primary, just based on the math, you would have to flip over to the other side simply because your primary electorate became much more centrist. The majority of them don't want assault weapons to be so easily available. And therefore, just to keep your seat, you're not changing, you're not being any better of a person, but just by following your own base instincts, you're moving to the center. Marty.
Bradley, I'm really glad that you covered the math of a lot of the political aspect and the whole thing of primary, which is big with AOC, for example. But I want to move this back to venture capital.
Sure.
And if you could tell us, where you think the great opportunities are, in particular, for what you do and the way you approach business. And also, I don't think you really discussed, Tusk Holdings and your strategic advisory practice.
Sure.
And how you step in with large private equity style deals or smaller ones and really have
Thank you.
Viewpoint that other groups don't have.
So Marty's making me talk about stuff that actually make me money. I just keep gravitating to the stuff that I care about. But all right, so on the venture side, so we invest in typically four sectors: health tech first and foremost, fintech, mobility, gaming, and we can do other stuff as a one-off. The reason we love digital health so much is it is such a big industry. It is so messed up. It is so fragmented, and it is so regulated. That there's just so much room for opportunity. So my favorite deal that we've done in digital health is something called OMA, which is back office. So it's business in a box for therapists. So therapists are both medical providers and sort of against their will, small business owners. But they don't want to be small business owners. They want to be medical providers. And so insurance and billing and all of that stuff they hate doing. So OMA basically does all of that for you. So they connect you, the insurer, the patient, the billing, everything gets done. You don't have to do it anymore at all. We invested in it. We led the Series A back in 2019. And I remember thinking about a year later, right? February 2020, we were worried that we had too many digital health investments. And then 3 weeks later, COVID hits, and the answer is you cannot have too many digital health investments. And uptake on mental health services went like this. Alma just crossed the $100 million revenue mark last week, actually. Probably done raising, but we own about 10% of the company. And for there, we're dealing with things like cross-state licensure. So it's a little technical and boring, but it used to be that if you were a doctor in New York, you couldn't treat a patient in Kansas. But with telemedicine, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. And so now we were able to waive a lot of those rules. So now everyone can kind of treat everyone. Go ahead, Mark.
Do you sense that a lot of the rules that were created for COVID because of this, being able to practice cross state is going to come back in place, or you think you're permanently?
It depends. So about 25 states have tried to reinstate these licensure restrictions. About 25 have left it. Generally speaking, we're seeing overall, look, like in any industry, the entrenched interests want to claw their power back, right? That could be true for hotel against Airbnb or taxi against Uber or casinos against FanDuel or whatever it is. We're seeing that from the medical boards and some of that as well. But one of the few upsides of COVID is almost all of you, I would imagine, had some sort of telemedicine interaction at some point where you talked to a doctor or a nurse or did something on your phone that got you medical care. Because we've now all experienced it, there's not a willingness to go back. And so we have to push back against the powers that be sometimes. But I think that we're heading in a direction where people are able to do whatever they want to do on their phones regarding healthcare. The second part of what Marty teamed me up to talk about was the strategic part of our business. So that's the consulting firm that I started back in 2010 and still run today. And we just run really big campaigns. So like, let's say we worked for Blackstone when they wanted to buy Peter Cooper in Stuytown. We handled all the politics around it to make that feasible. Because if you know the history of that particular property, politics were really brutal for Jason Spire in the previous incarnation. We'll work for companies like AT&T if they want to put free Wi-Fi in parks all over the cities all over the country. We'll change laws for CVS or for American Airlines or whatever it is. Could be federal, could be state, could be local. And where I think we're especially good is when it gets really hairy. Right. So if all of a sudden you got to pass a bill in 9 states or 14 cities at the same time, that's where we tend to be particularly useful because we're the only company that does that. Most people either focus on a particular jurisdiction or a particular skill set. As far as I know, we're still the only ones that will just build and run the entire campaign in as many places as you want all at the same time.
Is that consulting or is that lobbying?
That's well, it's consulting, but lobbying is part of it. We register when we need to. I had to sort of overcome the mental hurdle of that, but I got there. But I would say like the whole thesis I had when I started the consulting firm was the days where a guy who knows a guy and he makes a call, those are over, right? And if, by the way, if you're ever on a call and someone in politics tells you that's what they're going to do, assume the FBI is on the call as well. That world is gone. So my thesis was, and it seems so far like it's working okay, passing legislation today or regulation or permitting, whatever it is, requires lobbying, earned media, social media, paid media, digital media, opposition research, grassroots, polling, and lots of other tactics. And a good campaign has all of them at its disposal. And depending on whatever it is that you need to do to win in that particular jurisdiction, that's what you deploy. And the tactics we use in Utah might be different than the tactics we use in New Jersey. But either way, the goal is to win.
So, and just to get back to this, the topic of the venture capital. So a lot of VCs won't touch the stuff that you do, because it's political, it's binary. A new group comes into power, they want to change.
Yeah. So look, most VCs I think shy away from regulatory risk because they don't understand it and they're not sure what to do about it. We run towards it. And as a result, because I've got a monopoly, because we're the only fund that does this, we don't lose deals, right? If you're a founder and you know that you're going to have some sort of political regulatory problem, and I'm offering you money, my money is a lot greener than somebody else's. In fact, we often get warrant coverage on top of the investment because people really want us to be in the deal, both because it sends a signal that they're taking the regulatory stuff seriously and because we can actually take care of it. So yeah, we're a little different.
And so I was hoping that you could then talk about the capacity of your strategy, what you think it is, and then how much you're raising, how many deals you look at a year, how many you invest in.
So each fund does about 20 to 30 deals. We're targeting around 25 or so for Fund 4. Check size ranges from 1 to 7. The average is 5. We like to lead. But we are willing to co-lead or co-invest as well. Either way, we're sort of intimately involved with the company because we effectively are their PR department until they get big enough at scale to need it themselves, and then we help them build it out. We also raised a small sidecar fund of another $35 million after Fund 3 that allows us to just to double down on the winner. So company like Alma that I mentioned, where their last round was $780 million led by Thoma Brava. They're not going to need to raise again because now they're profitable. We were able to buy heavily into that round because we just have so much influence with the company. And so we're doubling down that way. So we're raising $200 million for Fund 4. I know that there's people raising much bigger funds. My view is I don't really care that much about management fees. I mean, I need them to run the business, but the truth is I've made a lot of money. I make other money from other places. I care about carry. And my view is the way that I make a lot of carry is that my LPs make a lot of money. and it's got to be totally aligned. And I really don't understand these like $600 million Series A funds where you'd have to have 14 grand slams to return capital. That's crazy to me. We've got a DPI of 2 already, almost 2 on Fund 1, because we don't take more money than we need.
But
sorry.
how different is what your consulting practice does for what traditionally has been referred to as cause-related marketing?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think on the consulting side, I think it was asked to contrast that with the venture fund. Yeah. I mean, so look, on the consulting side, there are times where a hedge fund billionaire will hire us because they care deeply about Israel or charter schools or whatever it is, and they say, "Go make this thing happen," and that effectively is a version of cause-related marketing, right? And then, but the consulting side is a business is just cash in, cash out, and the fund is a fund.
So I admire the fact I'm an IP patent attorney, and the fact that you got out of being an attorney, I admire that.
I'm technically a member of the New York Bar.
Yeah. So I was in the military. I worked for a big law firm, Jones Day, and I now work with DARPA. And the deal flow is good. So how can people around the table and myself send you deal flow in these areas?
Yeah, please.
I'm sure you see a lot.
Tusk at tuskholdings.com. Just Tusk at tuskholdings.com.
And everybody will get that contact information of his admin at least when we send an email out to the 450 people that registered.
Yeah, and
So
we
last question, Carol Pepper.
I know there's a lot of areas that you could play in because there's so many areas where regulation
Yeah.
goes across not only the states but then globally.
Yeah.
What are a couple that you're especially excited about in terms of green fields that nobody's really tackled?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say that about half our work falls into the bucket of startup comes up with a better way to do something that already exists. Like Travis likes to think that he invented the idea of paying people to take you from point A to point B. I'm pretty sure that's been going on for thousands of years. He came up with a better way to do it, took market share away from taxi, had a big fight. So that's roughly half of the kind of deals we do. The other half, like you said, are these green fields where it's crypto, it's AI, it's autonomous trucks, it's esports gambling. It's these things where there is no regulatory framework at all. And I have to say, they're really fun to work on because we're actually out there, instead of fighting off some entrenched interest that doesn't want competition, we're actually building out the regulatory framework for whatever industry this is as well. So, we run towards a lot of those. There's a few we stay away from. I feel like clean tech is its own world to a point where we look at deals but rarely do them. Biotech, I think that while it's heavily regulated, the process of getting FDA approval on a drug is so narrow and prescribed that the biotech funds can do it as well as we can, right? If it was, you got to legalize in every state, sure, then we would be really good at it. There's a few areas we stay away from. We stay away from GovTech also because, when I was in Illinois, I ran the budget and I know what government RFPs are like. And any company who all of their revenue comes solely from selling to government, with the exception of military, which I think is a different ballgame, makes me a little nervous.
Did you get involved with cannabis?
We did not. I'll tell you why, which is I have not seen a single deal in the last 7 years that I have found worthwhile. My view is that pretty soon, so cannabis right now is being reviewed by HHS and DOJ to come off of Schedule 1. That will effectively decriminalize it. It won't legalize it, but it'll decriminalize it. My view is that was always going to happen at some point. And when that happens, Unilever and Kraft and Johnson & Johnson, all the companies that are really good at consumer products are going to get into this space because why wouldn't they? And so whenever I looked at a deal, I said, why will they be able to either compete with Unilever, or what about them is so unique that Unilever will have to buy them instead of building it themselves? And honestly, there's one deal I passed on, Dutchy, that I regret passing on. It's compliance software for dispensaries, but with the exception of that, and the same thing is true in psychedelics. Like I love the concept of it. I think it'd be really good for society to make it more available, but they're not scalable tech products.